Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new self-titled Beyonce album. Beyonce is a famed R&B and pop singer who, through her solo LPs and her years she put in with Destiny's Child, is one of the most widely known singers ever. And her biggest records played a large role in shaping the sound of mainstream, commercial, radio-friendly R&B throughout the late 90s and 2000s. And unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you know how a lot of these records sound instrumentally, very clean, punchy, immediate. The most important elephant being, of course, Beyonce's incredibly bold and powerful voice, especially on some of her biggest singles like Crazy in Love and Single Ladies, Run the World, Irreplaceable. There's a lot of them. Honestly, I'm not really here to hold your hand through a bunch of stuff that you already know and music that you may or may not have grown up with. All I can really say is that outside of the singles, I've been pretty neutral on Beyonce for a majority of her career. However, I was pleasantly surprised by a lot of songs on her last full-length LP, 4. An LP where I actually thought she eased up a bit on the surface level, immediate commercial appeal of her music and started favoring instrumentals that were a lot more dynamic. And I basically went into this new LP of hers hoping that she would venture further outside of that radio-friendly comfort zone and sort of throw off the pressure to essentially make an album full of radio songs. And that's kind of been a recurring theme with a lot of popular albums from this past year. And this whole "I'm not making songs for the radio" mantra has been kind of a recurring theme with a lot of artists over the past year. Kanye, Jay-Z, Drake. These artists and artists like these dropping more experimental records, ethereal records, and specifically in the case of Jay-Z relying more on YouTube advertisements and the buzz surrounding a deal he did with Samsung to buy so many copies of his album and then distribute it to their users. And Beyonce, in a similar fashion as well, didn't really do any teasing with the music toward the release of this new album of hers. She just put it out toward the tail end of last year and just allowed everybody to hear it for the first time all together at once. And obviously putting her album out this way subtracts radio promotion from the equation when it comes to building to your new full-length album, but I think people are a little quick to jump the gun and just outright praise her simply for that on this LP. It's not like Beyonce didn't have successful singles in 2013. It's not like she didn't have a stunning Super Bowl performance last year. Plus, her album was plastered all over the front of iTunes the day that it dropped, which caused the internet to spread the word like wildfire. Considering Beyonce's young listening audience, which is most likely very deeply linked into the internet, I don't really know if you need much more promotion these days. However, right now it has been a handful of weeks since this LP originally dropped. A lot of the hype surrounding it has already dissipated a little bit, and it seems that Beyonce and her label aren't really looking to get into any huge advertising campaign to ram the album down people's throats in the coming weeks. And this slightly unorthodox approach for Beyonce is also reflected in the direction she takes the music in, too. She has over an hour of songs on this album, and they're brought to us by her and a gauntlet of co-songwriters and producers who you might actually be familiar with if you've been reading a lot of the liner notes of mainstream contemporary R&B and hip-hop albums over the past several years. Timberlake, Mike Dean, Boots, Noah 40, Drake's producer, Miguel, The Dream, Hit Boy, Pharrell, surprisingly enough, Caroline Polachek of Chairlift, and a lot more I haven't even mentioned. However, what is most interesting on this thing is, of course, the music, which has received a pretty warm reception from critics across the board, with a lot of people praising Beyonce for putting out her most surprising and ambitious album yet. And I guess you can tag it as that if you want, but I think there are some R&B records that have come out over the past few years that are a little more ambitious. Janelle Monáe's past few LPs, Frank Ocean's Channel Orange. You could even throw The Weeknd's Trilogy on there if you want to. Even though I do agree that this record is bold for Beyonce, I also find it being kind of parallel to some other LPs that have come out recently, like Nothing Was the Same, especially on the Drake featuring track Mine. I think Beyonce's new LP here is similarly atmospheric and vast, but it also meanders a little bit too and has some kind of dull instrumentals. There are tracks on this LP that bring some really heavy bass and some trap-style hi-hats too, and throw some really inane, self-serious swag on top that sort of reminds me of tracks from Miley Cyrus's last album, or like some Rihanna singles that have come out recently. Especially on tracks like Partition, which has all this sexual imagery in the lyrics that is so vivid, it's tantalizing like porn. And I don't really think this track or tracks on this LP like it are horrible, but I do think they lose their flavor kind of quick. There are high points on this record that are great, and some moments seem to be really personal and confessional, whether it comes to Beyonce talking about her life as a famous singer, or as a mother, or as Jay-Z's wife. And like I just said, with the sexual imagery, there are a lot of songs on this thing where Beyonce's not afraid to just get really raunchy. And I do think some of the songs on this LP do bring a heavier dose of that diva attitude and female empowerment message that a lot of people expect from Beyonce. The opening track on here, Pretty Hurts, is one of my favorites on this LP, and is a bit of a triumphant ballad about society's obsession with attaining unattainable perfection. And I think the power of this song comes down to the line, "It's the soul that needs the surgery." It's a bit of a sappy sentiment, but there is a hard truth to it that I like, and it does have a really explosive chorus. And Beyonce follows this really fantastic song, this shot at perfection, up with what I think is just like an apathetic shrug on the next track, Haunted. The first half of this song is just this really underwhelming, airy instrumental and a bit of spoken word. Beyonce says these record labels are boring, and maybe they are. And she also says out loud that I'm not going to make any money off this, oh well. But when you're making as much money as Beyonce and Jay-Z, maybe that's sort of a worry you can shrug off. And then there's this repeated line about people who are working 9 to 5 just to stay alive, and I realize that this is kind of a wake-up call, or maybe a push to get people to do what they love and follow their dreams instead of just working a dead-end job. But there are a lot of people in this position because of some kind of monetary responsibility that they have. I just kind of see this message as being a bit of a faint whisper in an insane traffic jam of noise that's been pushing the human race into this rank-and-file hive mind that's been going on for generations, which also, coincidentally, makes mainstream music as popular as it is. And there's a second half to this track, too, that's filled with sexual imagery, but it's only slightly less underwhelming in comparison with the first half of the track. The sexy attitude that Beyonce brings to the table is a lot more hard-hitting on the song Drunk in Love, and there's some stellar chords on this thing. And I don't mean the progression, I mean more the sounds. I mean the sound of the chords on this song. It feels like a string section just bouncing really energetically, but a string section from a dream. There's a really awesome vocal sample on this track too, but as soon as the trap beat of this song kicks in, I get a little sick to my stomach. For one, the bass hits on here barely complement Beyonce's voice and the chord progression of the song. They don't even really sound that fitting until Jay-Z's verse comes in. Jay and Bey sound pretty charismatic on the track and seem really blunt about sex with each other. Beyonce totally sounding like a sloppy white drunk girl from Southern California telling you about some kind of one-night stand that she had after a night at the bar. Grinding on that wood, grinding on that wood. Beyonce's even more sexually explicit on the song Blow, where she's asking on the chorus for this person she's singing to taste her Skittles. It's the sweetest in the middle, pink is the flavor, solve the riddle. Nobody's really racking their brains over this one. You know, I'm always happy when a song comes out about my favorite pastime, but the instrumental and the melody here just seems so effortless and listless. It's like listening to Rick James before his morning snort of coke. I could understand Beyonce wanting to do something different with this track and not have to conform to doing a radio song here, but I don't really think this song is bold enough, raunchy enough, out there enough to really stick. Same thing with the track No Angel. Beyonce, again, trying out something different here with a lot of breathy falsettos on the chorus. And there's some great vocal improvisations from Beyonce on this track too, but because of how redundant the instrumental feels, the track just sounds more like a motif or a meditation than a fleshed out song that's stunning or moving or catchy. I sort of feel the same way about the track Superpower too, with Frank Ocean, unfortunately just a little too redundant. I dig tracks on here like Jealous Way More, a track that lyrically is about a bit of an unfair double standard in a relationship where it seems like the guy gets to go out and have fun and do whatever he wants, where Beyonce's stuck home. The instrumental's heavy, it's lavish, it's very pretty, a lot like the song Pretty Hurts. And I dig the song XO too, probably one of the most triumphant instrumentals on on this entire LP with huge chorus vocals, a beautiful vocal melody. I just like the more fleshed out ballads on this album way more. I think the only banger on here that's actually memorable or interesting is Flawless. It has a really nutty trap beat where on the mic Beyonce is just so unafraid, so uncompromisingly confident that it's pretty contagious. I woke up like this, flawless. And I really do like the track, even though it is one of the most disjointed on this entire LP with its intro, its outro. Then there's this really strange, cacophonous, tension-building first half of the track, a bit of a lecture vocal snippet from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in the middle, talking about women being conformed to certain roles. It's a little long-winded, but I do agree with the message. And then there's the second half on here, which is incredibly catchy. Even though this LP is really hit or miss for me, I do think it ends kind of strong with the last two tracks on here, starting with Heaven. Sort of a slow-moving piano ballad that's a little vague on lyrical details, but it does seem to be a song about suffering some kind of great loss. And then there's the closer on here, Blue Ivy, which is a really obvious tribute to her daughter. And the melody and the instrumentation on this track is really beautiful. It's gentle. It's loving, like a lullaby. But still, I'm pretty neutral on this self-titled LP. I really enjoyed several songs from it. I disliked a few, and I was just shrugging my shoulders at most of them. And that's mostly because of how unfocused a lot of this album feels, melodically, structurally, instrumentally. Beyonce's lyrics, her messages, her personality rings through really clear and really bold on this record, and that's really one of the best things about it. What this LP suffers from is what I think albums like these suffer from, and that is that we have mainstream artists here essentially flipping the bird to making songs geared for the radio, and while, yeah, that's great, they're still not doing anything legitimately adventurous or risky or strange to make the move worth it. Overall, I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. Transition. But if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Beyonce, self-titled, forever.